Hello, everyone. My name is Molly Keyser, and today we will be discussing erasing news deserts in the United States, what exactly a news desert is, the impacts of news deserts, and a possible solution to go about erasing these vacuums of news and to fill it up with startup news organizations. Since 2005, there have been more than 3,000 newspapers that have gone under, closed, or joined bigger media conglomerates in the United States. In 2005, there were 7,000 non-daily newspapers, meaning either every week, every month, or every other week. In 2024, just last year, that number went down to 4,000 non-daily newspapers, meaning that 3,000 non-daily newspapers or news organizations have disappeared within that span of time. Also, there were 1,400 daily newspapers that were constantly in rotation in 2005. However, in 2024, that number went down to just 1,033 newspapers. Now, why does this matter? What is a news desert? There are many definitions to describe a news desert and how it is described, realized, and how they come about. However, according to local news initiative from Northwestern Medill, a news desert is considered an area that lacks consistent local news reporting that fills information and critical needs towards the community. In my own words, I described a news desert as a community or a county that does not have or is not provided with local news stations that communicates local needs to citizens, local governments within the community or county, and of that sort. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, where are news deserts in the United States? Because obviously we have national news organizations that anyone can access. However, local news stations are just as equally as important as national news organizations. So news deserts are predominantly located in areas that lack funding or impoverished because there's no funding for these news organizations or startup news orgs. In the United States right now, from a report done in 2024, there are around 206 counties that are without news stations, meaning that 55 million people go without local news every day. This might be inconsequential for some people, meaning why should we care about local news? However, local news is important for every community, every county, because it tells you what's going on within your community. It tells you local initiatives, local startups that you could help support, or local government issues that need rallying behind. So here's a map provided by Local News Initiative by Northwestern Medill, and basically it shows every county within the United States. Every county that has 0 news outlets are highlighted as yellow, and the highlighted dark purple areas are areas with 2 or more news outlets, and the areas in light purple are communities and counties that only have 1 newspaper. And predominantly, we will be focusing on Ohio since that is the state that I reside and that I will be living there in the future as a future journalist. As you can see on the map, there are 1, 2, 3. There are 3 counties within Ohio from 2024 that have no local news outlets. These counties are Meigs County, Holmes County, and Gallia County. And each of these counties used to have newspapers in 2005. However, as of now, there are no newspapers within these counties, leaving everyone in these counties without local access to community initiatives, community news, or local governments. And within the state of Ohio, there are 1.8 news organizations per 100,000 people. And as a state, We are ranked 42 out of 50 per capita. Now here's an actual map of Ohio. This map was produced later, I think in 2016. So it's not currently updated. However, Meigs County and Gallia County are down here. So they're in the yellow, meaning there's, I think, one newspaper, and Holmes County is up here. However, these newspapers have disappeared since 2016, and now in 2024, each of those counties are without newspapers. Now, why does this happen? Why are newspapers so important? Newspapers are obviously an access to your First Amendment right, free speech, free press. You are able to have resources wherever you go because of news and access to news. And because there is a lack of news organizations within these counties, they can lead to dangerous impacts like a decline in voter turnout, a distrust in news organizations globally, meaning that they won't trust national news organizations because they have such a lack of funding with their own local news, a lack of community initiatives, political party sways, and the spread of misinformation. Impoverished communities or communities that lack funding are the communities that get hit the hardest from news deserts because they don't have the initial access to make these news deserts disappear. They don't have the funding that they can put behind to make an effort to have news organizations within their communities. And so across the board in the United States, we usually do see that more impoverished communities have less access to news. There is a solution that I have thought of after researching this complex problem for a few weeks now. In an article by Terry Finman, they discuss how college media student organizations can balance out communities that go without news organizations. So basically, a news startup community and a news startup organization for a college could potentially outweigh a news desert within their community. For an example, this actually has happened right here in Oxford, where Miami University is located. Oxford Free Press was founded by a Miami University alum who was also the editor-in-chief at the Miami Student. And it was founded because Oxford was living in a news desert for a while. They did have news, the Miami Student and the Oxford Observer, which are both news organizations that are through Miami University, the college. And so that was a way for locals to get news about, but this news that the Miami Student and the Oxford Observer produced was mainly about Miami University and college initiatives and things that were happening around the college. However, Oxford Free Press is a news organization that mainly only focuses on the community of Oxford. They obviously do stories about Miami University because of the close proximity and because it is such an important part of Oxford. However, Oxford Free Press only focuses on Oxford news to seal that vacuum that was left behind because of the lack of news access within Oxford. And in this research study, there are 3 cases in which student journalists are used to start up news organizations located in news deserts. Student-run media can definitely combat news deserts because they're heavily involved with the inner workings of both the community and the college. And because the college has such a big way on the community around the college, it makes the news organization more trustworthy for the locals and more initiatives behind the news organization. From the article itself, it stated, these student-run online newspapers illustrate not only a potential solution for addressing news deserts, but a reimagining of the conceptual and practical roles of student journalists, meaning that as a student journalist, you are actively getting experimental learning through these new startups and through student-run online newspapers, as well as the community gets their news through that, and there would be a close in news deserts. News deserts are an important part of this country because they need to be recognized that of the negative impacts that it can produce, and like stuff like voter turnout, a distrust in media, lack of funding. So news deserts need to be sealed and need to be erased because of all the negative impacts that are produced because of these things. Overall, I think the solution of a student-run news organization could work because of the wide range colleges have in the areas, in the communities, the trust in the college in the communities, and also the experience that student journalists could get from this potential solution. They could do this instead of interning, start their career as a journalist through these startup organizations to help local communities get news to local issues that are happening. And here are my sources. Thank you very much.